Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything.
What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the In All Things podcast. I'm joined by Mitch and Jared today, and we're going to have a talk a little bit about adulthood and adolescence and all of that. But before we kind of go into it, Mitch, how's it going today?
Good.
Yeah, you were at Cody's wedding this weekend.
I was in Arkansas.
Yeah,
Kansas.
First time. It's hot.
It is
It's
hot.
dry heat there.
Is it dry? Okay,
Yeah.
at least it's not hot and like muggy.
Yeah, it's just hot.
Yeah.
But it was cool. I've never been there before, so
Mhm.
drove 11 hours.
Yeah,
It's easy.
Razorbacks?
Flew by.
that's friendship right there.
Actually, the DJ of the Razorbacks DJ'd the wedding
That's
Nice.
awesome.
because they know him and go to all the games and stuff. So they just were like DM'd him like, "Hey, you want to do a wedding?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he was so good. He was awesome. So that I actually
That's
kind of did. But yeah,
They're
it
everywhere.
was a good time.
Wedding
you know.
DJs underrated. Like they kind of make or break the reception.
Yep.
I've been to a few where
Oh,
it's
I've been
like,
to some bad ones.
oh, somebody's nephew, and you're like, this
Yeah.
is not good
Yeah.
dance music.
This may be the best I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
Like he was actually like mixing in songs. Like it was cool. So
That's sweet. Sweet.
Yep. Everything was good.
Jared, anything new? Cool.
Sweet.
Nothing new.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit about extended adolescence.
What's
and
that?
Exactly. So I think the best thing that we can do to have this conversation is to kind of define terms early on. Extended adolescence is the term used for this trend that's been going on for the past maybe 10, 15 years of primarily men turning 18 and then into their early 20s and not going into adulthood, trying to pawn off some of those adult responsibilities so that way they can stay adult teens for longer. The BBC had an article when I was researching this, and that says that now adolescence lasts from 10 to 24. And their reasoning is because the body continues to develop until you're 24 years old. And the Scientific American had an article that says 25 is the new 18, and that people don't want to take on the challenges of adulthood and are in no rush to forge out on their own path or move out of their parents' houses and things like that. So that's the definition of extended adolescence, is the trend we're seeing all over the place. In America, it's been a thing. In Europe for quite a while. But I think it's probably a good thing to start talking about our own experiences. So, Jared, how old were you when you moved out of your parents' house, and how old were you when you felt like you actually were an adult? Because I think those are two different things. I think when I moved out of my parents' house, I had gotten married, and so I got my first apartment with Mallory. I was pretty young. But I didn't feel like an adult until like a couple of years later, when it was like, you know, you're just in normal adulthood, doing normal adult stuff. When was that for you?
It's a good question because I don't know. For me, and a lot of people that like leave to go to college right away when they turn 18, kind of like is almost an instantaneous thing, right? For a lot of people, you gain an autonomy like almost overnight.
It's like a whole new world. Yeah.
So it's not like, I feel like there's, for people that make the decision to go away to school, like I did, like was from Georgia all the way to Virginia, so it was a good ways away. I could just like go home on the weekends,
sure.
So that was kind of that. I would probably say it wasn't before that, and probably was right around that time. Where like, oh, I'm like 6 hours from home. My parents don't really have rule or authority over me right now. So that I would say that would probably define it for me.
Yeah, sure. Mitch, what about for you?
So I went to college kind of locally, at a little private Christian college, and so I saved money and commuted, but I basically lived there with my friends. But yeah, so I didn't move out until I was 20. Moved out like 2 months before Lexi and I got married.
Yeah.
And so I moved into our apartment and, just kind of lived there on my own for a little while before the wedding. Yeah, so I was 20. And I mean, so college, it was kind of like a step 1, step 2. Like college, you just kind of naturally, I think, most people start to feel more adult and more like, okay, this is kind of on me, responsibility. I also started working here in that year as well.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, okay, I've got to start to balance college, now, a full-time job. And then, at the time it was like getting ready for a wedding. So I kind of like just had almost a year of like kind of just stepping out of, okay, time to manage my own life and manage my stuff, manage my responsibilities. And then, when I moved out in November of 2020, I was 20. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I can start to figure this out now.
Yeah.
And then obviously getting married changes it too, because, now you become your own family unit and, it kind of changes things there too.
Yeah, you have to figure out how the two traditions and everything kind of merge into something new, right? And you have to be your own man. I had a similar experience to you. I lived at home during college to save money, and then also moved out right before I got married. But I think that's a good transition kind of into one of the first observations that I noted when looking at extended adolescence. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are getting married later and later. Your parents, certainly. My parents, I don't know about your parents, but got married very young. My dad was 19. My mom was 21. I know your parents were even younger than that.
Yep.
How old were do you know when your parents got married?
Mid-20s.
Sure. So also pretty young, even by today's standards. I think people are getting married later, just overall, and I think that pushes back some of that need to go and find your own place. But you're working with students on a regular basis, and obviously we've got a class of people graduating and turning 18 and going out on their own. What are you seeing in the next generation, good or bad or neutral, that is either preparing them to step into adulthood, or are you seeing that this trend is continuing, that people are going to stay in this extended adolescence type of behavior kind of moving into the future, and this is just the new norm?
Yeah.
You have an interesting perspective working with them one-on-one.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a generality because, and I think if I had to guess, that's probably what we'll get into a little bit in this conversation, is I think so much of it comes down to how your parents raise you
100%.
and the expectations that are set at home, you know? And so I think, working with students, I see both ends of the spectrum, because I think students in high school now are like taking way more college classes and they're way more involved in different things even than I was, and I'm not that far removed from high school. But like when you come in as a freshman, like North, the high school right next to us, when you come in as a freshman, you enter into a track based on roughly what you want to do in college.
Wow.
So all your classes are geared towards that track that they put you on. It could be multimedia, it could be, something, medical related, whatever. But all your classes are kind of built around this track that they're hoping kind of set you up for college. So in a lot of ways, students are, there's a whole other kind of side of this conversation, the disappearance of childhood, which is a big thing that's happening in our world too. And that's part of it, where students as a freshman are going, oh, I want to study biochemistry. And they're just saying that. But then their whole 4 years is geared around studying biochemistry. And they're like, I guess that's just what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, at 15, you're trying to decide the trajectory of the rest of your life.
Right. And so there is an element of the world that we're living in are forcing them to grow up quicker. But then the other end of the extreme that I see is the parents who, shelter, take everything on, helicopter parent kind of thing, baby them, even if they're 18 about to graduate, and it's like they've never made a peanut butter jelly sandwich or done anything, right? So then it's like the thought of moving away, or some of them do move away, and then it's a really, really bad experience because they've never had to do anything on their own. Yeah. And so I think, from my perspective, it's kind of like you see one or the other. There's not many right in the middle of just kind of like, I can take some responsibility for myself, but I'm also kind of nervous to move out. Like, there's really none of that anymore. It's either like, oh yeah, I've been running my own schedule and doing my own thing since I was 15, or like I don't know how to use a fork and knife, I'm screwed. Like it's just like there's the two ends of the extremes, I feel like, right now.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes down to parenting. But
I agree. I don't know. I would imagine your parents were pretty similar, because I agree. I see the exact same thing. I see people who are they turn 18 and it's like, wow, look at this 27-year-old over here managing his money and getting stuff ready. And then I see the other side where it's like, look at this 27-year-old. Like, I don't know, do their parents do their taxes?
Right.
You know, stuff like that. For me, my experience, my parents, the second I turned 18, my parents said, you're paying rent here, even though I was still in high school. And they were like, the only bill that they still paid for me was my phone bill. And they said, we want to get you off our family plan. You use too much data, so get your own plan. And so I was like, okay, cool. And I knew that was the deal always growing up. I knew once it was 18.
was that all your siblings?
Sure. Yeah. You know, no hard feelings about it. But yeah, I would say the vast majority it was like that. And I think that's just, you know, that's how my parents were raised. My dad, when he was 18, he went to college in Texas, from California. And so he was very much, you know, and they didn't move him into his dorm. He like drove his pickup truck out there and figured it out, showed up and was like, I guess this is where I'm going to college. And so I think he appreciated the things that it taught him. And so he imparted that on to me. But I think because I don't want to just make a bunch of generalizations, I think we can make it a little more personal because we are all three parents, which means that, you know, you've got the longest way. I'm just slightly ahead of you, and you're a lot ahead of the two of us. But we're going to have to look at this in our own parenting. How do we want to raise up our kids to step into the world and be adults, but also not be so cold and like you said, cut off childhood and not allow them to be kids and make mistakes and be a safety net. What does that balance look like, and how are you preparing yourself and maybe even thinking about those future years for your kids to find that balance, Jared? Because you're the closest to that happening. I mean, your oldest is how old?
She's gonna be 10. Soon.
Yeah, so you're only like 8 years away.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, 8 years.
Like,
yeah,
yeah.
still. Or have you not?
Yeah,
even thought about
it's a good question. Like I don't want to put too high of expectations on them to where they feel pressured to do anything specific or to grow up at a certain speed. I think there's definitely an element to letting their personality and tendencies develop on their own without, being overwhelmingly, without overwhelmingly pressuring them into, growing up before they're ready to be. Our oldest is, I don't know if it's just oldest child tendencies or what, but she tends to like have some of that innately in her to like she's a leader of her sisters, and she loves to take responsibility. She loves to do what's right, all of those things, and I think that on the other hand, like if you try to pressure those things on kids, I think that they tend to push back really hard. And I think it's difficult for us, any of us in this room, to speak of this with young kids specifically,
right. Sure,
because they don't have any autonomy yet, and they shouldn't. But you can see those things and those qualities and those traits in them early on, even from 1 year old, right? Like you're like, oh man, your baby is so headstrong, and you know, like she's stubborn, and you can see those things develop in kids. Your goal is to see them grow up and be successful and become their own person and their but at the end of the day, they're part of your family, and you want them to be around you. I think that I would hope that when my kids turn 18, they still want to live at home. I think that's the goal of being a parent, is to create an atmosphere that your kids want to be a part of. So I don't know that I would say that it's not necessarily a bad thing, that it's a trend, for people to live at home longer for, whatever it is, Gen Z and those coming after Gen Z, whatever it is.
Is that Gen Alpha?
Yeah. I don't think that's a bad trend. The negative trend would be, what's enabling them to do that? Is it their, the parents, like you said, over parenting or over sheltering? Because at the end of the day, if you are 18 and you're launched out into the world on your own and you have no job, no money, nowhere to live, no education, it's probably not going to end well.
Right.
But, if you're living at home for an extra 5-6 years after high school, you get your degree, you have no debt, you have a great job, and then you start, the possibility of, creating a family is going to be much more successful. So, yeah, I just think at the end of the day, I think it's great to let kids develop their own personalities and tendencies without pressuring them. But like I said, three of us have a long way to go before we get to where we are actually going to see our kids. And maybe me not so long because have a almost 10-year-old who sometimes acts like a 15-year-old. So.
Yeah. I like that about that not making a culture of your family that would push a kid to be like, well, the second I turn 18, I'm getting out of here, right? Yeah. And I think my parents, I was an unruly child, and so whenever I would have arguments or temper tantrums, it's like I can't wait to leave when I'm 18. Yeah. But, they didn't create that atmosphere. It was very much like, no, you can. I think part of it is also, and I know we don't want to get too crazy political, at least not in this conversation, but a lot of it is economics, right? Like you said, if you're 18, broke as a joke, and going to college and you don't have a place to live, maybe you don't have a job that would even allow you to afford rent, that plays into it. And I think, housing is housing. We know what that is like right now, and it's insane. And so I think that's a fair reason for people to stay home for longer and save money. But I think the difference is, of course, like you said, it's the mentality of parenting where it's like, why are they staying home? Are they staying home because they want to go out and have fun and have no responsibilities? Or are they staying home to try and set themselves up for the future? Mitch, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, as I was thinking about this conversation, it was hard not to think about just the state of, how expensive things are right now and just, where we are in the world. Like, that's a very real factor for people as they get to that stage of life right now is, like, I couldn't afford to live on my own right now, and I think the college system is changing more and more, to where the draw to not be hundreds of $1,000s in debt is awesome. And so there's more and more people just like, maybe I won't go to college and just start working, or maybe I'll go online and just get a degree quickly. Like, I think that whole system is changing. So I think there's so many nuances in this conversation. I don't think it, like Jared said, I don't think it's all bad that, there's people wanting to stay home longer. But I think it, it comes down to, like you said, it comes down to reason. It comes down, why are they staying, Is it because, you just can't let them go out into the big world because that's not great? Or is it because, they want to be there for a little bit longer and want to be set up for a more successful future when they do step out and create family in their own life? And I think all of that's important to look at too,
Yeah, I think we just got to be careful not to overplay that. The economy card, because it is a real factor. Like, it really is. But at the end of the day, I think society trends, obviously move in circles and things come back around and things like that. But, even biblically speaking, we talk about, when two people get married, Bible literally says that you leave your mother and your father. So
leave yourself.
What is the implication there is that they're probably still living as a family, and I know that, throughout history that the age that people get married was, has varied as well. Very, very, very young but, and then also, the idea and mindset of like civilized school systems and college, like that's relatively new. College has only been, around for probably few hundred years, I would say, especially in a sense that like it's something that is expected for everybody to do. So I just think that like when we're generalizing these things, we have to be careful to like not put too many cards into one basket and say it's all this or all of that. It could just be a societal trend coming back. And I think that, hopefully one of the silver linings in all of this is that maybe there is being more emphasis put on the idea of family and closeness and relying on one another, rather than it just being like, oh, you're 18, we're kicking you the heck out of here. You're no longer a part of us. I think that there's definitely some great balance if you look at that and say, oh no, like kids just want to be, they want to rely on their parents more. They want to grow in their home more, and they're hesitant to leave because they have a great setup, like that's healthy.
Yeah.
Not always healthy, as we've said, there's factors that parents can entrap their kids and things like that, and try to convince them that they can't ever leave. But
what an awesome opportunity for parents too,
right,
to say, okay, I have a little bit longer time with my with my kid, the older that they get too, to where we can have real conversations, and I can show you more of the ins and outs of life before you leave home. Like if there is that period of maybe a little bit longer than 18, I think parents could see that as a really cool opportunity to be like, man, I get a couple more years with my kid, and the older that they get, I can show them how to cook and show them how to do laundry and show them how to do taxes. Like, there's cool opportunities there too, I think.
I agree. I think it takes intentionality though, right? Titus 2 talks about that, talks about older men and older women teaching younger men and younger women how to live in steadfast love for God. And if you expand that into just life in general, it'd be how to live and how to set up a home and do it in a godly way. Do you think that we have an obligation as parents in some ways to have our homes available to our kids regardless? And I only bring this up because in some of my research, a lot of people who were pro extended adolescence, kind of talking on some of the things you were just hitting on about this is more years of influence, this is great, but they were extending it all the way into let's call it early 30s, but they were referencing 1 Timothy 5:8, where it's talking about if a woman is widowed, you should take her in, and it says, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for the members of his household, he's denied faith and is worse than an unbeliever. They were using that, and I think, in my opinion, taking a little bit out of context, but is there something to it that as Christians we have an obligation to be a safe haven, a shelter to our families? Or is it sometimes, I mean, I know case by case, but is it sometimes better to do what they did back in, the 30s, 20s, 40s, where they're like, kick you out the door, you're on your own, go make your own life, young man, type of deal? What do you think about that?
I think, it just is the parents' responsibility to know their kids, as simple as that sounds. Like, I think it's not going to be the same for each kid and each family and each situation. I think the parents carry a responsibility to deeply know their kids and what their kids need, and then when you get to those kind of crossroads or those kind of situations, you have to kind of parse that out depending on who your kid is and how you parent, and just like all those different things, I guess. But I mean, I think there's obviously lots of examples of the home and family being important and being really important things that we have here on earth. So I think if the home becomes a safe place or a place to return to even after kids leave, I think that's an awesome example of what it looks like to come home, when we go away from God and come back, like the prodigal son kind of idea, even if they're not doing anything bad. But I think just creating a place for them to come home to, or to eventually bring their new families and new kids, and just want to come back to you. Like, I think that's a really maybe good example of just what the love of God looks like, just constantly drawing back those who belong in his family, right? And so I think as parents, if your kids leave or graduate or move on, what an opportunity for you to just demonstrate that, hey, we're always here, arms wide open, no matter what that looks like, kind of thing.
For sure.
I don't know. I think there's something there.
I think there is. Maybe obligation is too strong of a word, but I think a strong encouragement to live like that as parents.
I mean, I think a lot of what the Bible calls us to in every form of life, whether it be parenting, whether it be our jobs, whether it be whatever, is just stewardship, right? So stewarding a home and stewarding a family, I think that's part of it. It's not just cutting it off hard, but I don't know.
If you were to take this whole conversation and idea and strip back the idea of being an American and with all of the resources that we have as Americans living in one of the richest countries in the world, I just wonder what this conversation would. There are some places where people would just laugh at this conversation, where you've got 3-4 generations living in a household together, and it's completely normalized and accepted, and they would never consider anything different from the time you're born to the time you pass on. You're living in the same house with all your extended family, and that's not a foreign idea. I mean, that's accepted all over the world as a way of life, and then. Not to derail this conversation.
No, you're good.
But here we are, like in this country, like talking about, like this 19-year-old's still living at home. What the heck's his problem? You know? So it's an interesting perspective that I think we don't think about a lot. What would it be like if like we're trying to put these like biblical truths and concepts into a system that we've created ourselves. So
it's not a one-to-one translation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think in Italy, the culture is very much that. You've got grandma living with her kids, and then her kids are now adults and getting married, and they're going to live in that same house as well, which is such a beautiful idea of like family and generations, and the great grandkids get to know their great grandma, and everybody's kind of in this unity. I think America is so founded on this idea of personal freedom, and it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, I love the freedoms that we have from living in this country, but sometimes it does turn into the flip side of that coin, which is exactly that 19-year-old still living at home, good for nothing, come on, go do something with your life type of deal that other places would never think of.
Any of the social norms of America have almost caused us to strip value away from family just because of that. Like, it's what we're taught. Like even in grade school, it's like when you turn 18, you're gonna go to college, and then you're never gonna return home. You're gonna find somebody at college. You're gonna get married, and then it's almost all like out of order and out of whack. Like the idea is not that. You grow up and then like you just get a job and then you abandon your family and become autonomous. Like, and then eventually like, your parents get so old that they need care and they have to move back in with you. Like, like it's almost, it's just, we do it really weird. I would accept that as normal just because that's how we all have grown up, and we've all, but just weird to think that like, all over the world you have different systems of this. And I would say that, in America here, we don't value family. Like if you had this like family value scale, you had to put like every country on this scale. Here in America, we would be, I would imagine, pretty close to the
low
bottom. I mean, you look at like you were talking about marriage rates, like people are. I think that the reason that statistics are showing us that people are getting married later is just because less people are getting married, and the value on marriage isn't really there. Like why would I need to get married? Like other than a tax benefit, like people don't, because they don't have a concept of what biblical marriage is. So I just think that a lot of this conversation might have a lot to do with the lack of value, the overall family value. The idea that one day I'm going to be responsible to create my own family, and then my identity that I'm leaving behind with my parents, that's just poof gone until I'm forced to care for them someday.
Can I flip it for a second?
Yeah.
What does it look like to value family too much, or is that a thing? And what does it look like to pull the family card in situations where that's kind of just an easy out? What is that? I think that could be an interesting point of this conversation too, because I think there are instances of people who almost value family too much, right? So what does that look like in our culture, I guess?
Yeah, I think I've seen firsthand families where you go, wow, they're all super close. I mean, Mallory's family, they all lived within, all extended cousins, far removed. They all lived within 1 hour of each other, and which was cool because it means if there's a big family event, everybody comes together. I remember when we first started dating, she was like, come to my nephew's, I think it was like first communion, they're Catholic, and I was like, okay, sure. And we rolled up and there was like 90 people in a house. And she's like, I haven't seen some of these people in 5 years. And you're like, oh, okay, this is like, we've been dating for 3 weeks. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here, but okay, cool. But the flip side of that is I saw on the underside of that, the obligation that everybody felt to show up to everything, and how it becomes almost a burden.
Yep.
And then they would use that burden to, justify poor decisions or justify why they don't want to go do things that actually need to go happen. Don't it sound like I'm, hating on Mouse Family? I love them. They're awesome. But I've seen it firsthand, right? I've also seen it firsthand with the snowplow parents who do everything for their kids because they had it so hard. They were kicked out at 18 and had to figure out their own way, and so they don't want it to be that way. I think it's dangerous when you lean on either side too much. Anything can be turned into an idol or turned into sin.
Yep.
And I think when either of those are turned, they become really ugly and not something that we want for our kids, for sure. I think there's also something to the idea that we have, at least in this country, of it feels like every generation wants to, it's a noble want, but wants to make life even better for their kids. And I'm not going to do these things that I think my parents did wrong or whatever to my kids. I'm going to do it this way, which I feel like kind of devalues really good parenting, because I feel like, I'm sure you guys would say it too, my parents were great parents. We're all humans and we're all, we all have moments, but they're great parents. And so if I go into parenting and go, I want to do everything completely different from how my parents did it because look at how messed up I am or whatever, devalues parenting. It means that nobody ever did a great job parenting because you're always trying to seek that perfection. And it, again, to your point, it kind of devalues family. I don't know. Jared, what do you think about the two sides of that coin?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to come up with like, here's an example of this, or here's a time where somebody has valued their family way too much. I just think that that's not where the pendulum is right now as a society. So it's not like, as far as, here in America. But yeah, I don't know. I think that like in the things that I've been learning lately, I think you were just alluding to this. The hardest parts there would be when a new couple gets married and they're having to choose sides and tendencies. Like, we're going to spend a majority of our time here rather than there because one side of the new partnership and marriage values their family way higher. And I think that, there could be like a lot of pull there because maybe one side isn't willing to let go. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I just think, the bigger problem is the devaluation of family. So the conversation is hard to have on the other side. But I'm sure it is.
Yeah,
it's there. Like,
Mitch, what do you think?
I guess part of what I was thinking was like, I can't remember what we called it, but Steve did a series here last year, Sneaky Idols. And one of them was family. One of the weeks was family. And like how there's people who can't say no to things or can't say no to their kids because they're to some degree overvaluing, these are my kids, so I have to say yes to everything kind of thing. Or like something I see a lot and I've experienced myself is like justifying or enabling really unhealthy behavior because, they're family. But you would never, ever, ever justify that same behavior from a spouse or from a friend or from anybody. Like if you saw that in anybody else, it would be like, stay away from that person, whatever. But then there's situations where it happens with family and it's like, but they're family, so we have to, just say nothing about it kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's dangerous.
I agree. I think early in adulthood, I was talking with my dad about kids, and it was kind of in that weird transition. You guys have experienced it as well when you step out on your own and your parents take on more of a friend role and mentor role rather than like a active parenting that you've known your whole life. But he said that the second you depend on your kids for happiness, it's really unhealthy for you, but it's even more unhealthy for your kids because they sense that they are now your
world.
your world, your source of pride and joy, and what pressure to live up to, right? But yeah, I mean, the easiest example that we talk about in church is, we can't come to church because Timmy has a baseball game, and therefore we're only going to be in church 2 Sundays in the fall because that's the season or whatever. And I think that's absolutely family being valued too much, because I think it's actually an unbiblical view of family. But it's the worldly sense of family. But on the counter side, kind of what you were arguing, that family's being undervalued. I had a conversation with a friend who goes here, a great guy, and he was talking about how when he was raised, he saw how his parents interacted with his grandparents, or I should say how infrequently they interacted. And so he took that as to just be his total norm. Okay, cool. When you forge out on your own, you have a family, like, you see them every couple of years. And that's kind of what grandparenting is, and how his parents didn't want that for him or for his family at all. They want to be involved in his lives a lot, and he's very much kind of like, well, I don't know what that looks like. You never modeled that for me, right? And that's kind of a generational devaluing of family. And his parents had reasons for keeping their parents at an arm's length, and like we said, every situation is nuanced. But I can definitely see both sides of this today. I think when we're talking about adulthood and stepping into your own world, I think that is where your side takes over a lot, of just devaluing family, stepping into new marriages and everything, or not stepping into marriage at all because, like you said, what's the benefit, right? So do we have any takeaways for this conversation? 'Cause I'm feeling very much like, it's a case-by-case basis. You should value family, and it's kind of weird that we as a country value family so little compared to other countries. On the other hand, we see a lot of value in being your own person and stepping into who God created you to be, apart from your parents, with your spouse and with your family. And there's such joy and beauty in creating your own traditions and raising your kids up. But on the other hand, you don't want family to be an idol or fall by the wayside. So I guess for me, the takeaway is readjust your view on family to what the Bible says the family should be, not what culture or our country or society says family or adulthood or adolescence should look like. That's very general and broad. Do you guys have anything more specific?
No, I mean, I think, why wouldn't the enemy want to attack family, the family unit? Like, that has amazing potential to be a breeding ground for disciples that were nurtured and loved well, and can be released into the world as really good disciples of Jesus because of their parents. So why wouldn't the enemy go after the home? So I think the two extremes that you just talked about, are both, like, the enemy's happy with either one, right? Like, he's very happy with a family who, doesn't really value family, and in a culture that downplays family. He loves that because you don't have that home base to come back to and be built up and supported and sent out and taught, right? And disciplined and all the things. But he also probably loves, a home that idolizes family and worships family, because it takes away from things like church and takes away from things like hard conversations and discipline and that kind of stuff. So I think he probably loves both those extremes. And if we find ourselves in either one of those, we're kind of, playing to his game a little bit. So there's got to be somewhere in the middle of, like, yes, home is, and family is the means to be discipled really, really well as your kids, as an adolescent, whatever. That is the place to learn so much and to grow so much and learn who you are and all those things, because you can't really separate from yourself from your family ever. It's always going to follow you. But at the same time, value the fact that you are your own person with your own gifts, and you are going to have to leave and build your own life at some point. And so I think it's kind of a middle ground.
Yeah.
That's my only takeaway. I don't know if that's super applicable, but that's my thought.
Yeah, it is middle. It's a gray area, but podcast called In All Things, and God's working in that gray area too, right? Well, very cool. Well, I hope you found this conversation interesting. Maybe God was working in you when we were talking about this, and you feel like you're leaning too far on one side or the other. If that's you, then give it all to God. And if you need prayer, we have a great prayer team. You can always submit prayer requests on the app or the website or in person on Sundays. Stay tuned. Next week is our very last episode of this season of the In All Things podcast. We got a special one. I brought on some students. We're going to talk about worship because worship is my jam. And it's going to be a good one. So please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of the In All Things podcast. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.